Hey everyone, we're at CES 2018 at the Corsair suite now, looking at a couple of new cases. They also have a power supply that's worth a mention at least. So the case mainly that we're talking about is the 500D. There is also a new case in the spec line of cases though. For the Obsidian 500D, this one should be somewhat familiar to you all because we reviewed the 570X when it came out a little while ago. This has a lot of 570X tooling, so if you liked that tooling, you're probably already partway there on this case. Before that, this coverage is brought to you by Thermaltake and the Flow liquid cooler. The Flow is a 360mm radiator with 3 Ring RGB LED fans. You can program the fans for custom lighting through software, and then of course benefit from the larger radiator size in cooling performance. Learn more at the link in the description below. A couple of things to point out though for changes would include the tops had a bit of a change. So in terms of radiator support, it's easier to get a 280 up there now. The clearance between the top of the motherboard and the top of the case is a little bit thicker. So that should help out a bit. Previously it was about a 240 was kind of where you stopped. So this one goes 280, and previously also there was more of an offset than there is now. Other than that, there are two versions of the 500D that I should point out. This is the aluminum front version, obviously tempered glass. There's a price difference and there's also a fan spec difference. The fan spec difference is this one comes with 3 RGB fans. That one comes with 2 SP fans. The price difference is about $100, $150 versus $250. Part of that's the fans, and then part of that is going to be tempered glass because tempered glass has a bit more price involved with it when you're bending it like this because of yields. So those are things to know about the two different versions. Kind of smaller but cool features. This door that I keep opening actually is somewhat from the concept slate that we saw at Computex previously, that gigantic 40-pound case, if anyone remembers that one. So these are inspired or partly pulled from that. Some of the tooling's pulled from the 570X. They're all bits and pieces that you should somewhat recognize. The front of the power supply shroud can be removed by screws. So if you wanted to ventilate that or route your cables differently or whatever, you can remove that front power supply shroud cover. It's also got a vertical GPU mount, so of course there's getting on board that train with everyone else at this point. The vertical GPU mount, basically the same as we've seen in the past, mounted with 2 expansion slots in the back, sits vertically right up against the glass, and then for the extension cable, or for the riser cable, you need to buy your own. So BYO riser cable, in this case. Corsair may look into that in the future. They do products with riser cables. It's just riser cables are actually kind of hard to get the right ones because there are some performance issues with the cheaper riser cable. So you have to buy your own for that for now. Other than that, I think that covers the majority of the case, really. It's not too different from a mix of all the other things we've seen in the past, but it's a good stout mid-tower, I guess, if that's what you're looking for. The backside does have slightly different hard drive cages than previously. Now you can mount the hard drives in either orientation if you want the PCB exposed or the metal plate exposed. So very small change, but one that's worth noting as well. And I think we can probably move on to the new Spec Series case and take a look at that, although I'll just quickly point out the airflow here. So airflow on this one, we've been talking about airflow nonstop. For this case, you do have about 1 inch on the side of the front panel for breathing, which is what we typically recommend from our testing. So that's good, past that test. There's no bottom intake hole on this one, no top intake hole. It's just the front I/O or the top I/O up here with a USB Type-C, first case that Corsair's done with that. And yeah, so we'll see how cooling does in testing, but they do have a decent amount of room here, and there's nothing really behind the fans. There's no cages or anything like that, so it may very well be okay. Let's move on to the next case. So the next case, this is a bit cheaper at $100. This one you might recognize a bit for 2 reasons. This front has been on at least one other Corsair case. You may remember the Spec Alpha. We looked at that ages ago. So it's a bit of the Spec Alpha front, and then the internal is a 460X, which we saw at PAX a little while ago as well, at least a year, not more. So yeah, 460X plus Spec Alpha basically is what you get. In terms of fan support, it has an SP LED fan in the front and just a blackout fan in the back, and then it's got an LED bar in the bottom front as well. So basically Spec Alpha plus 460X, and that's the start and the end of this one. So the last one we're going to talk about is a high-end power supply, and I'm only going to give a top-level overview of some of the changes here. We don't presently specialize and power supplies. So I'll give you the basics. It's an AX1600i. It's 100 watts more than the previous model, and we'll go through the basic aesthetic stuff first. It does come with a couple of different magnetic labels if you want those. $450. In terms of the more technical stuff that I'm not going to dive too deep on, so the main change I've been told about is, I guess, the PFC components, the transistors that comprise the PFC, the power factor correction component, typically are silicon. And from what I understand, these silicon transistors have an efficiency of something like 94 to 95% in a typical power supply. That's not for the entire load of the power supply, so you're not talking 94, 95 of 1600 watts under full load. You're talking 94 to 95% of the PFC transistors. What they're doing here is using gallium nitride, which is apparently 99% efficient for that specific component. I guess the potentially more significant thing, or at least more noticeable thing externally, is that it shaves off about 20 millimeters on the power supply length. And in terms of other stuff that I do know more about, unfortunately I don't have specs on. So the PCIe gauge, for example, I don't know the 12 volt gauge on that wire, which is definitely something we care about with all the modding we've done of the Titan V lately. But yeah, that's all I know about this one, so we'll move on. But $450 for the AX1600i. We've got the two cases that we showed, or three if you count the variant with the aluminum panel 500D, glass panel 500D, and then the Spec-Omega. So that's the Corsair suite at CES 2018. As always, you can check links in the description below for more information. They also had a keyboard and mouse that we talked about previously a couple days ago. Subscribe for more. You go to patreon.com/gamersnexus to help us out directly. Thank you for watching. I'll see you all next time.